2025's box office has been a disaster so far. Disney's would-be tentpole flopped, Pixar's new movie flopped, Marvel's attempt to reignite people's interest in superheroes flopped, and don't even get me started on all those original films for adults. Everything from Wes Anderson to Steven Soderbergh to Bong Joon-ho bombed at the box office too. When two of the year's top box office hits are Minecraft and Lilo and Stitch, that's saying something. So here are the 20 biggest box office bombs of 2025. Explained in 22 minutes. Wes Anderson used to have this super predictable formula. He'd make a quirky, beautifully shot movie for about $30 million, and it'd reliably turn a tidy profit. But after COVID, even Anderson isn't safe anymore. He's had 3 movies since the pandemic ended, and only one of them, Asteroid City, managed to cross 50 million worldwide. The Phoenician Scheme became his lowest-grossing film since The Darjeeling Limited in 2007. Anderson did have that Netflix project, those Roald Dahl shorts, one of which even won him an Oscar, but his theatrical movies lately just aren't working out. Still, if you're worried he's done for, relax. Anderson has a billionaire friend bankrolling his passion projects. He's got enough cash to keep making these movies basically forever, even if nobody shows up. Lionsgate could seriously use Anderson's billionaire buddy right now. Their big hope this year was Ballerina, a John Wick spin-off starring Ana de Armas, but the thing just never caught on. It opened decently enough, but then immediately crashed, down 65% in week 2, earning just $9 million. It ended up as the weakest performing entry in the entire Wick universe since the original film, which, by the way, cost less than half of Ballerina's budget. Fans were pretty blunt about the issue. No Keanu Reeves, no excitement. One fan summed it up perfectly. Keanu drives the franchise, not Ana de Armas. Right now, Lionsgate's box office bombs keep piling up. Remember their 7 flops in a row last year? And they're desperate. In May 2025, Lionsgate even split off their movie division from Starz, basically begging for someone to buy them out. Legendary Pictures, the folks behind the Dune trilogy and the massive hit Minecraft, are sniffing around, and there's some rumors. They're already starting to team up on co-productions, and if that works, Lionsgate might just vanish altogether into Legendary. Pixar was once Hollywood's safest bet, basically guaranteed hits for nearly 30 years. But the pandemic flipped that completely. Now, Pixar's original movies keep missing, and Elio is another expensive flop to add to the list. Some people blamed weak marketing, but that's totally off base. Disney spent almost as much promoting Elio as they did on the live-action Lilo and Stitch remake, and that made a fortune. The real problem here is super simple. The premise is boring. Pixar's whole brand used to be original and exciting, but Elio just didn't have anything interesting to sell audiences. Even Pete Docter admitted it's been tough getting original animated films to land lately. Pixar's next original film, Hoppers, set for 2026, looks stronger. But for Elio, no amount of marketing spend was going to make people care about a dull idea. Pixar learned the hard way, or at least I sure hope they did, boring movies don't sell. And speaking of Disney flops, the new live-action Snow White might be the clearest case yet of a studio completely misjudging what people want. Forget all the dumb controversies about Rachel Zegler or the CGI dwarfs. The real reason it tanked is way simpler. Nobody actually cares about a Snow White remake. The original animated movie was groundbreaking, sure, historically important, but it never had the kind of nostalgia power that movies like Aladdin or The Little Mermaid had. Millennials didn't grow up endlessly rewatching Snow White on VHS, and Disney blew an insane $270 million making a live-action remake of a movie people weren't exactly begging to revisit. It was basically made by committee, tons of execs meddling, trying to please everybody, and in the end pleasing nobody. No amount of controversy could have saved this one. It's just another expensive lesson Disney refuses to learn. Megan was a huge surprise hit back in 2022, so obviously Blumhouse rushed out a sequel, and it bombed hard. Opening weekend was supposed to hit at least $30 million, but barely managed half that, just $17 million. Then it completely collapsed in week 2, ultimately limping to a $37 million worldwide total, not nearly enough to break even. Jason Blum himself actually admitted exactly what went wrong. The studio basically mishandled everything. We thought Megan was like Superman. We could do anything with her. Change the genre, redesign her, even turn her into a hero. But we seriously overestimated how much people cared. You gotta respect Blum for openly admitting they screwed it up by getting cocky and overthinking it. Disney could probably learn something from him, but you know they won't. This was Julian McMahon's final film, and Nicolas Cage at his most unhinged. Cage plays a guy who comes back to his childhood beach, just wants to surf with his son. But the locals have this aggressive rule. Basically, you're not from here, stay off our waves. Pretty soon, Cage's character is totally caught up in escalating conflicts that push him to a breaking point, especially with the heat and the hostility getting worse every day. It's a weird film, uncomfortable to watch, obviously R-rated, obviously Nesh, so yeah, it pretty much never stood a chance at the box office. It opened in only about 880 theaters, which, let's be real, is the worst possible number. Too many theaters to build indie buzz, but way too few for a real opening weekend. Predictably, audiences hated it, 46% on Rotten Tomatoes. But weirdly, critics loved it, 86%. Honestly, if it had gotten even half the promo push that Cage's unbearable weight of massive talent got, maybe a different story. But also, how do you even make a trailer for a movie this bizarre? It bombed, pulling just over $2 million off a $5 million budget. Then, literally 1 week later, we got the same story with Fight or Flight. Josh Hartnett on a plane, having the time of his life with a chainsaw, fighting assassins trying to kill him. Total 90s-style B-movie chaos, but with a $40 million budget for some reason. Critics went nuts for it early. Opened at 100% on Rotten Tomatoes before landing around 76%, calling it basically an A-list actor doing a glorified B-movie. But again, audiences didn't show. Vertical actually gave it their best effort, over 2,000 theaters, basically their widest release since that Russell Crowe exorcism flop, but it landed in 7th place. You can't exactly blame them. Marvel's Thunderbolts was still eating up all the box office, and another bomb called Shadow Force was right there too. Hartnett described it as from the same company behind John Wick, and yeah, you can feel some of that. Solid action scenes, totally bonkers vibe, but the story's barely there. Still, didn't deserve to bomb that badly. Made under $4 million off a $40 million budget. Vertical really had a rough year. Right before the Hartnett plane fiasco, they released another huge bomb, Paul Anderson's fantasy epic In the Lost Lands, starring Dave Bautista and Milla Jovovich. It's based on a short story by George Martin about a witch traveling to find magic that transforms you into a werewolf. Great idea on paper. Netflix-quality execution in reality. Anderson's track record lately is pretty terrible. Death Race, Three Musketeers, Pompeii, Monster Hunter, all flopped. Why would this one do better? Exactly. They tried marketing this as the first movie with more digital actors than real ones, a gimmick literally nobody cared about. They spent $55 million, and it made just $3.6 million. Anderson actually showed the movie to Martin himself privately. Said Martin apparently loved it, told Anderson he captured his voice better than anyone. Well, at least someone enjoyed it. You'd think after HBO's dumpster fire The Idol, The Weeknd would avoid more self-indulgent vanity projects. But he went ahead and made Hurry Up Tomorrow, and it turned out even worse. Basically, a psychological thriller about a sleep-deprived musician meeting some mysterious stranger who changes everything he believes about himself. The Weeknd's huge fan base couldn't even save it. 15% on Rotten Tomatoes, horrible reviews across the board. People online literally said stuff like self-indulgent mess from The Weeknd. Jenna Ortega should be ashamed. People clearly had enough of his antics, especially after The Idol. Lionsgate stupidly picked this up after almost 2 years in post-production limbo and immediately regretted it. It bombed hard, made just $7.7 million off a $15 million budget. Went straight to video on demand barely 3 weeks after release. Funny thing is, it could have been even worse. Rachel Zegler was originally considered for Ortega's role. Imagine the internet backlash that would have caused. This one makes 0 sense. Steven Soderbergh directing Cate Blanchett, Michael Fassbender, and Pierce Brosnan in a spy thriller. How the hell does that bomb? Fassbender plays George, a spy who finds out there's a mole stealing something called Severus, a cyber weapon. Problem is, one of the suspects is his own wife, played by Blanchett. Sounds good, right? Critics absolutely loved it. 96% fresh, praised the acting. Scriptwriter David Koepp even consulted real spies for realism, but people just never showed up. Budgeted at $60 million, made just $42 million worldwide. Dumped onto video on demand only 17 days after theaters. Soderbergh took it pretty hard. He said, "These star-driven mid-budget movies used to be exactly what I built my career on. If adults over 25 don't show up for this, what happens to future filmmakers wanting to do stuff like this?" He even said publicly he hoped it would succeed. Not just for him, but for future directors trying to make grown-up films. Rough situation, and sadly, it didn't. Usually these small, low-budget horror flicks are a guaranteed moneymaker, but somehow this one completely tanked. Borderline stars Samara Weaving as a 90s pop star whose home gets invaded by an obsessed fan. Basically, a romantic sociopath who just wants to be loved. Pretty thin premise, to be honest here, but could have worked as silly horror. Biggest issue here was the script. Thin characters, forgettable roles. Even Weaving's own horror fans called it her weakest performance yet. Weirdly, her husband Jimmy Warden actually wrote and directed this thing, which makes you wonder why he didn't just write her a better part. Magnet released this simultaneously in theaters and digital platforms, and guess what? If people can watch a small horror movie comfortably at home right away, obviously they're skipping theaters. So instead of the usual profitable little horror hit, this got a pathetic $240,000 off a $5 million budget. Complete disaster even by low-budget standards. Daisy Ridley was huge when the Star Wars sequels came out. But now Star Wars is basically dead, and Ridley, unfortunately, kind of faded along with it. She starred alongside Clive Owen in this R-rated British thriller called Cleaner, and nobody even noticed it. It's got a pretty standard setup, basically Die Hard, but set in a high-rise building taken over by radical activists holding 300 hostages during a fancy corporate event. But then one extremist within the group decides he's willing to kill everyone, and of course it's up to Ridley's character, a former soldier turned window cleaner, to save the day. To be fair, Daisy Ridley's performance is actually pretty solid here. And it's directed by Martin Campbell, who's usually dependable with action stuff. But the story itself feels like a mix of things we've already seen way too many times. It got released onto just 300 screens in the US, which meant most people never even heard about it. So, no surprise, it totally bombed. They spent $25 million making this thing and made barely over $1 million back. Warner Brothers gambled big on Mickey 17, a sci-fi comedy with Robert Pattinson, directed by Bong Joon-ho, the genius behind the Oscar-winning Parasite. Pattinson's character keeps getting cloned in space missions gone wrong. It had potential, made around $50 million globally right out the gate, but the problem was, Warner Brothers just spent way too much money making it. The budget ballooned to around $118 million after reshoots and tax breaks. It's not Marvel, but it's still way too expensive for a quirky, non-franchise sci-fi film. Sure, Bong Joon-ho is an incredible filmmaker, but even Parasite, which won Best Picture, only earned about $50 million in the US. Did Warner seriously expect his offbeat sci-fi movie to suddenly make Marvel-level money? So, after a weak opening, Warner basically panicked. They dumped it onto streaming just 18 days after it hit theaters. It wrapped up at around $126 million worldwide. And the thing is, Mickey 17 would have needed about $300 million just to break even. Warner Brothers bet way too high on Bong's name alone, and the math just didn't work out. Great filmmaker, interesting idea, but this kind of budget was total mistake. This one premiered at Sundance and stars John Malkovich as Moretti, a reclusive rock star who invites a few select journalists out to his isolated mansion for the launch of his first new album in 30 years. Naturally, things turn dark quickly. On paper, this could have worked. It's got Malkovich performing original songs by Nile Rodgers and The Dream. That alone sounds worth checking out. But the problem is, reviews coming out of Sundance were just so-so at best. The buzz was weak, and when it finally hit theaters, A24 didn't promote it much. They quietly opened it in around 1,700 theaters. It barely cracked $2 million. Director said he made it for movie nerds who want something challenging and different, but unfortunately, there just weren't enough of those people who knew this movie even existed. It vanished almost immediately. Joe Carnahan's done decent action flicks before. I liked his A-Team, and Smokin' Aces was dumb fun, but his new one, Shadow Force, is basically a disaster. Kerry Washington and Omar Sy play ex-Special Forces operatives who break their organization's rules by falling in love. Naturally, they go into hiding with their son, but now, their former teammates are hunting them down. Totally generic setup. You've seen it 100 times already. This movie's real problem is it's embarrassingly bad, the kind of action flick that has people laughing at the wrong times. It sits at 30% on Rotten Tomatoes, and critics trashed it for looking cheap and feeling like a throwaway streaming movie. Lionsgate barely screened it for critics beforehand, which is never a good sign, and when it finally hit theaters, nobody showed up. A generic rogue spies on the run premise isn't enough to fill seats anymore. It cost $40 million and made back just $4 million, making it another brutal flop for Lionsgate. Barry Levinson, director of classics like Rain Man, made this big-budget mobster film with Robert De Niro. De Niro plays two different mob bosses, childhood friends who become enemies. Problem is, nobody cares about mobster movies anymore. They've been dead for years. On top of that, critics absolutely hated Levinson's gimmick of having De Niro play both roles. It just confused audiences. Washington Post called it supremely distracting, and New Yorker said it felt like a weird stunt. With a weak 37% Rotten Tomatoes rating, bad buzz, and no awards hype, it crashed on opening weekend, just over $3 million domestically, and overseas it did even worse. Warner Brothers spent $45 million hoping De Niro in a mob film could still sell tickets. Clearly not. Total worldwide ended up under $10 million, making this one of the year's biggest studio disasters. A24 is having a rough time lately. They used to mean something. Indie movies, fresh takes, but now they're kind of slapping their brand onto anything. We got stuff like Opus and Death of a Unicorn underperforming, and now The Legend of Ochi, a kid's fantasy movie that took years for the studio to finally greenlight. But by the time they actually released it, it felt like even the studio had lost faith. It's not even a bad movie. Story goes like this. In some remote northern village, a girl named Yuri grows up hearing never to go outside after dark because of these mysterious forest creatures called Ochi. But when a baby Ochi gets abandoned by its pack, Yuri heads out on an adventure to help the little guy get home. Pretty sweet story, actually. But none of that mattered. Movie bombed badly, made just $3.5 million off a $10 million budget. Audiences completely ignored it. It might just be that people are tired of A24 slapping their name onto random movies, like they're trying to be the next Miramax, even though that model doesn't really exist anymore. Whatever happened, people clearly weren't showing up for this. There was a time when everyone knew who David Cronenberg was. Guy basically invented body horror, he's a legend, but those days are over. Nowadays, his movies barely get limited releases. Take his latest, The Shrouds, a weird little drama about death obsession. The main character invents a special burial shroud so grieving people can watch their loved ones decompose. Typical Cronenberg, right? The film premiered at Cannes 2024, hit theaters April 2025, and completely tanked. Didn't even make $1 million. Critics mostly hated it, calling it frustrating, empty, wasted potential. They thought Cronenberg totally blew what could have been a cool concept. And this might actually be Cronenberg's last movie. He told LA Times that the world probably doesn't need another one from him. Said it'd be arrogant to keep going, even though he's feeling healthy for now. Might just go back to writing novels instead. If you're still curious, Criterion Channel just picked it up, so you can stream it there. Here's a movie that honestly should never have made it to theaters in the first place. Valiant One is a survival thriller about non-combat army specialists whose helicopter crashes behind enemy lines in North Korea. And the studio falsely advertised it as based on a true story. In reality, the filmmakers just loosely drew inspiration from some real-life border incidents. They did some homework, sure, tried to portray army communication and soldier relationships realistically. But the end result was dull, forgettable, and painfully cliché. Rotten Tomatoes slapped it with a pathetic 29%. Critics called it clumsy, cardboard characters making dumb decisions. Basically the opposite of what you'd want from a gripping military thriller. Maybe if you watch it as a low-budget B-movie at home, you'd find it okay. But putting this thing in theaters was a huge mistake. It barely pulled in just over $1 million from its $10 million budget. I genuinely have no idea what they were thinking with this movie. Writer-director Timothy Scott Bogart made a pop musical version of Shakespeare's tragedy. Set at the end of the medieval era, this is literally Romeo and Juliet without any of Shakespeare's original text, just 15 brand new pop songs written specifically for the movie. Maybe, if those songs were actually good, this could have worked, but they're not. All 15 sound identical, with painfully direct amateurish lyrics. And the cast wasn't even terrible. Jason Isaacs, Rebel Wilson, Rupert Graves. They even filmed in actual Verona, Italy. But nobody asked for this movie. Variety called it a boring, amateurish attempt at being another La La Land. And theaters actually released this, over 1,000 screens for about a week. It barely made $450 grand against a $15 to $20 million budget. Total disaster.